buy Bitcoin today in 4 years, it's not going to be any kind of supply side. It's sort of irrelevant. We have, MicroStrategy just bought 50,000 Bitcoin, yesterday. So like, what is that? That's, that's 100 days worth of supply. MicroStrategy alone is buying more than the entire mining. The ETF complex is buying a multiple of the Bitcoin that is being mined every day. I just don't think that having this, and even the miners are buying Bitcoin. You have Marathon is buying Bitcoin. So I just don't think that you can make the argument that there's going to be this supply shock when we get, the next halving. It really will be completely insignificant and nobody will care.
I can see.
I'm not debating whether we're going to have bull markets and bear markets. Okay.
Right.
I'm just debating whether they're going to coincide with mining cycles, with halving cycles. I don't see any reason to believe that we're going to have a bear market in 2026 at this point. Why?
It's actually crazy to me. MicroStrategy bought 0.25% of the total supply.
Yeah.
That's insane.
Maybe you can speculate. Yeah. Maybe you can find one that's that's undervalued. I personally just don't feel like it's a good use of my time trying to figure out who are the good ones, who are the bad ones. I'm not that interested in it. So I also don't waste a lot of sleep thinking, what will happen if the hash rate doesn't go down, or do we have to worry about fees, or what happens in 100 years when we, sort of mine the last Bitcoin. These are not relevant questions right now. And I think we can focus on the questions that are, likely to make a difference, like, legislation and TradFi adoption and things like that.
Yeah.
Those are the things that are going to make the most difference in the next 10 years.
Absolutely.
And that's kind of what I'm focused on.
And I wanted to ask your thoughts. That was actually going to be my next question. So you made a video, my 5 Bitcoin predictions for next cycle. Yeah. I think it was. Was that what it was? But you were saying how for one thing you said was, I don't remember all of them, but one thing you said was, I think you said something along the lines of the strategic Bitcoin reserve. That was one thing. You said something along the lines of the power law
in 2011. And it took until 2020, 2019 for it to get back to that kind of level, right? So assets as big as the stock market or gold can have 10-year periods in which they're basically going down and then having to go back up. But Bitcoin doesn't seem to be that. Bitcoin seems to be an asset that is growing on this, quasi-exponential rate. Not quite exponential. It's going at an exponential, but the constant growth rate is not constant. It's decreasing, right? So that's sort of what the power law says. And whether you think it should or not, it's a mathematical fact that it has up till now, right? So I just think that the mathematics suggest that the power law will continue for the next 5 years or so.
So what do you think would break the power law? Like it might continue, but what do you think could break it? There is a non-zero chance, right? There's a non-zero chance.
Yeah, there's a non-zero chance, but it's sort of your best estimate of what, right. Like it's not zero, but like there's a chance we're going to be visited by aliens too next week. Even to go to 1%, that's going to take an enormous thing, and it's not going to happen overnight, right? And I think the power law says, well, you're not going to get 1% overnight. You might get 1% over a 10-year period, and you're going to get 1/10 of 1%, and that's going to go to maybe 2/10 of 1%, in a couple of years, and then it's going to go to 4/10 of 1%, and then 6/10, and then a full percent, and ultimately potentially multiple percent, right? But it's I don't expect that TradFi alone is going to. It's not like everybody's going to wake up and decide that they all want Bitcoin instead of S&P. These things take a long time for people's asset allocation decisions to really change, right?
But we're now seeing. Have you seen I mean, of course, you know about MicroStrategy, but have you seen what was it? Alliance, is that their name?
Yeah.
They bought some of the MicroStrategy convertible bond.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that could change things? Because if
it's not most large high net worth people did not want to put their money in stocks. Okay. They wanted to put their money in bonds. That's kind of where people view stocks was just viewed as too risky, too crazy, maybe you'll get a good return, but probably not, And meanwhile, bonds paid, 8%, government bonds. Like, okay, you want 8% or do you want some crazy Nabisco, which RJR Nabisco, which was the top, LBO target at that point, right? So, probably 8% sounds better, or maybe you take 9% and you get some kind of mortgage bond or something,
Yeah.
So it took, it's taken from, a good 40 years to really completely change the religion from all bonds and a little bit of stocks to, you will be 60-40 and your majority of your money will be in stocks. Even if you're 75 years, we're still back, where it was back in 2021, which was 69,000, So maybe we should wait until it goes back to 50,000 or 40,000 and then buy that. So anyways, I think that's the kind of thing that, that you come to that kind of conclusion that we're in this range and 70,000 is the top and maybe 20,000 is the bottom. And maybe a better time to buy might be right in the middle, like 35,000, right?
Yeah.
And, from you and I are sitting there going, it's never going to get back to 35,000. It will never get there. Right. But, from his perspective, it's like a very highly speculative thing that doesn't really belong in, an elderly person's portfolio. And if it does, maybe we should try to not appear too stupid and buy it at the all-time high. So, I just think, I just think that, I have a lot of friends from, Wall Street. They're going to be like, well, I'm going to get rid of this first, right? It's like, it's run by Saylor. He might get some liquidated. He might have some margin calls, whatever. If I got my Bitcoin in cold storage, well, that I know. 1 Bitcoin equals 1 Bitcoin. Great. I have a framework for dealing with a bear market in my ledger, right?
Right.
So I think they're going to sell the MSTR, and I think they'll sell it down to where it starts becoming a bargain, right? Like you don't go from rich to sort of rich. You go from rich to cheap, right? Now, what's cheap? Well, cheap might be, 30% underneath fair value, right? That might be cheap, right?
Yeah.
And, we know what that looks like because we can look at GBTC, right? And GBTC was trading at, 45% under its net asset value back in January of 2023, right? I know because I bought a bunch in January of 2020, systemic risk to the entire system.
Okay.
And they're going to start, the price of Bitcoin now will actually go down because people are worried that MicroStrategy might have to sell their Bitcoin, which is then going to create more of a vicious cycle on the downside, right?
Yeah.
So the flywheels work on the way up. The flywheels work negatively on the way down, right? And if MicroStrategy gets too big, I could potentially see a danger on the way down. And does that mean it's a systemic danger long term for Bitcoin? No, but it just could mean we get into a really bad bear market for Bitcoin. Yeah. And one of the casualties of that bear market might be MSTR, right? It might be, right? Like, so there's definitely some scenario where MSTR goes bust. Okay, in my opinion, that's not zero, right? The way. So I don't think it's going to be, again, none of this stuff's catastrophic for Bitcoin. And, 20 years from now,
everything is good for Bitcoin.
I get all that, right?
Yeah.
But that's one class of people. The other class of people is people who have Bitcoin and, they may say, you know what, I have Bitcoin, but I want to support other types of things. Maybe I won't call it diversify, but they want to have a little fun, right? Mm-hmm. They might want to say, I'm going to speculate a little bit with 10% of my Bitcoin, or maybe even 30% of my Bitcoin, right? So I feel like those are the two kind of classes of people I see with MSTR. And if you look at people on my spaces and stuff, I say most of the people on my spaces are people who actually own Bitcoin, but they just want to have a little fun, right? And they're like sitting there going, yeah, you know what, Fred, I'm willing to play with like 10, 20, 30% of my Bitcoin, maybe even 50%, right? With MSTR. Personally, I don't see the need to do that anymore. I did it. I was one of those guys, right?
Yeah.
I bought calls on MSTR. I did really well with my calls on MSTR, okay? But do I see a massive need to buy MSTR at 3 times things wrong? Is not trying to figure out exactly which horse to run. The horses are pretty clear. The problem is people need to stick with the horse for a long period of time, right? That's more important. So to me, I think I'm pretty happy with, like, if you want to be involved in MSTR, go ahead. I'm not going to knock you for doing it, right?
Of course.
And I won't even say that I wouldn't play again, that somehow it goes down and I decide to buy a little bit more. But for me, the meaningful position I have is Bitcoin itself. I just think Bitcoin itself is the more interesting long-term thing. And my main thing is I just want to, and why am I on Bitcoin spaces, and why, because I've thought about this. Why do us as a group love to hang out and talk about this stuff? And I think what it is we're all there for one reason. We want to convince ourselves and build conviction about our asset, right? Yeah. We all have so much of our savings and our time, and it would make it, you're not living forever. So, whatever. Yeah. So it's nice having real estate. If I was really young starting out, that would be the last thing I would try to do. Right.
Yeah. If
I was young right now, if I was a millennial, or a Gen Z, and I'm sitting there going, I got to save up for a house, I'd be like, wrong idea. You know what I mean? You should be like trying to get as much Bitcoin as you possibly can right now. And I would be 100% in Bitcoin. That's what I would do.
Yeah.
Like, once you get kind of to middle age, you're like, yeah, I don't need to be 100% Bitcoin. And maybe I don't want to rent a place. I want to have my own place.
Yeah.
But, I think for young people right now, it's very clear that, it's the biggest thing that you're ever going to spend your money on is a house, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's also, I think it's, we're also in a very mobile society now, right? And if you think you're going to always be in Toronto, I could probably have news for you. Probably aren't. You know what I mean? Like,
no way.
You know what I mean? Like, your options are much higher now, right? It's much easier to live anywhere you want in the world, right? And so, and I think more and more people are realizing this. And so I think over even just the long-term advantages of just having Bitcoin, the disadvantage of tying your financial situation to a specific real estate market, right, is not great, right? Because you don't know. I mean, you could be in San Francisco and all of a sudden it goes from in